The race to become Britain's next Prime Minister kicked off this weekend, with headlines about Michael Gove's cocaine confession rather than promises on Brexit. The Environment Secretary admitted he'd taken the Class A drug while working as a journalist in his 30s, ahead of revelations set to come out in an upcoming biography. Gove's drugs past is not unique. Boris Johnson has admitted and joked about taking cocaine and cannabis, while other wannabe prime ministers like Rory Stewart admitted he'd smoked opium in Iran 15 years ago, and Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt said he'd enjoyed a cannabis lassie while backpacking around India. Today, Andrea Leadsom said she smoked weed at university, and even Dominic Raab confessed he'd smoked cannabis as a student, though he insisted he'd never touched Class A drugs.
But
Perhaps that's why Mr. Raab was so forgiving of his rival.
I think Michael set out that he made a mistake. It was a long time ago. People will judge it as it is, but I do believe in a second chance society more generally.
Do you think it's damaged him?
That's not for me to say. I think, actually, I rather admire his honesty.
But people like Met Police Chief Cressida Dick have increasingly warned of the dangerous disconnect between middle-class Britain talking away their recreational drug use and the very real misery and violent crime that exists within the trade.
Is it fair to say, Commissioner, that some of these middle-class dinner parties that send out for cocaine on the weekend or whenever it might be, they've actually got blood on their hands of some of the people who are dying on our streets?
I think anybody who is seeking recreational, in inverted commas, drugs, particularly Class A drugs, yes, I think that is a good way to put it.
And today, from a drugs policy campaigner, this criticism.
It is a grave hypocrisy because obviously they've admitted to using drugs in the past, but of course they haven't suffered any of the consequences of the sort of very punitive and repressive drug policies and laws that we have in the United Kingdom.
But in the leafy constituency of Conservative Surrey Heath, where Michael Gove is the MP, voters seemed remarkably relaxed.
We've all done things in our younger years which perhaps weren't quite the wisest thing to do.
Were you shocked to find out that Michael Gove has done cocaine?
Not really, no.
It shouldn't have a great deal of influence over somebody's career 30 years hence.
What do you make of his admission this weekend that he took cocaine? Does it matter? Does anyone care?
We spoke about this morning and we both agreed that it was 20 years ago and he's a different person then.
Have you done Class A drugs?
No, never. She says.
There's still time.
With a little halo.
It remains to be seen whether the heartland of Tory Britain will be so laid back. Candidates have until Monday to be nominated before MPs vote in a series of secret ballots, with the final choice made by party members on the 22nd of June.
Well, joining me now is the Conservative MP Alberto Costa, who's backing Michael Gove in the Conservative leadership race, and Marcellus Baz, a former gang member and drug dealer who now runs the charity Switch Up, which works with young people in Nottingham to steer them away from crime. Alberto Costa first, do you think that Michael Gove should be criticised for breaking the law in the past or praised for his honesty?
Well, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I welcome the fact that the Tory leadership candidates who have taken drugs have admitted to that. I think that's the right thing to do. Look, Michael has admitted to having taken drugs, I think 2-3 decades ago, before he was married, before he had any children, before he had any prospect of being a Member of Parliament. He's right to have said it was a mistake for which he terribly regrets it. But let me be clear, the reason I've accepted coming on this evening, Cathy, on your programme, is Michael's made a promise to me that he's going to protect the rights of 3.6 million EU nationals whose rights were wrongly put on the negotiating table. No other leadership candidate has yet declared that.
Okay.
So I want Michael to be the Prime Minister because he's got the right skill set.
Okay.
And the right
We'll debate that on another occasion, but yes, I appreciate that. Marcellus Baz, do you think this is hypocrisy or honesty on the part of Michael Gove?
I think it's honesty, and I think that it's good that he's honest because this has highlighted an even bigger issue. It's highlighted the issue of middle-class people buying drugs, having dinner parties, and then purchasing them drugs is actually directly contributing to young people losing their lives, knife crime, massive youth violence. It's contributing to sexual exploitation and county lines. Now, for me, the sooner they realise that this crime, purchasing drugs, is not just a victimless, silent crime, the sooner we can start looking at solutions. And solutions can be not just educating people with hoodies, but people in ties too.
Oh, well, that's a good point, isn't it, Alberto Costa? What do you make
I'd
of
like
that?
to praise Marcellus and the thousands of voluntary workers and other charity staff members that do the work that people like Marcellus do in our country.
But the specific point about middle-class drug users like Michael Gove contributing to the problem.
I understand that, but the problems that we see in society are usually as a result of very vulnerable people who fall into gangs, who take drugs. And actually, the work that Marcellus does mustn't be belittled with today's political stories.
Well, no, but actually, people are fueling that, aren't they? I mean, Cressida Dick's point, you saw it in the film there. The Justice Secretary, David Gauke, says that middle-class people who use cocaine should feel a degree of guilt and responsibility when they see teenagers being murdered in Hackney, East London. Pretty sobering, isn't it?
And I agree with them, and I think that's why it's right that Boris and Dominic and all the other individuals who are standing for the leadership, like Michael, have admitted to taking drugs, have said very clearly it was a mistake in their past lives.
You don't think it's hypocritical?
I think it's right that we have sunlight as a disinfectant on this matter. But I want to go a step further. 3 hours ago, I was in a cafe, Cathy, in London, having a late lunch. And I overheard two ladies talking about Michael and Boris, and I interrupted them and asked them about today's media news. And do you know what these ladies said to me? It's of absolutely no importance. What is important is how we exit the European Union. That is the issue of the day.
Can I just jump in there? The fact that your middle-class people are purchasing drugs is causing a direct need for people and a monopoly for people then to sell the drugs. And that, in fact, is causing directly youth violence, knife crime, and young people that I work with losing their lives, and that other people, family members are losing their lives. And for me, that it's very important that we start looking at the whole of society rather than certain aspects of society. And we need to be looking at solutions to be able to address that with people from all walks of society, and that's what we really need to look at. And Michael was not just a guy who was like a student or at school or something. He was actually a journalist. He was a professional. He was in a line of work, a professional guy, a journalist taking cocaine, and that's happening right across the country. This is nothing new to me, Cathy. It's been happening for years and years. Middle-class people buying drugs, having dinner parties, and not knowing the impact it's having on communities.
And when you were part of a gang that was dealing drugs, who were your customers?
There was people in middle class professionals. There was judges, doctors, all kinds of people from all walks of life. So I know that it's been happening for a very, very long time. But the fact that the focus hasn't been shining there. It's been looking at, deprived communities, single parents, lack of education. We need to be looking at the whole picture to really look at solutions.
Isn't he allowed a pass, though, and to own up to a mistake in the past and to be honest about that? It deserves some credit, doesn't it?
I believe that this is a bigger issue that's highlighted the fact that middle-class people do buy drugs, have been buying drugs, and will always be buying drugs. And what we need to do is educate them and educate, around the fact of what impact this is actually having on people's lives. Kids are dying out there.
Well, I spoke earlier today to Sir Crispin Blunt, a colleague of mine, a senior Conservative, and I think he would agree with much of what Marcellus has said, because Sir Crispin wants to initiate the debate in Parliament and bring on board stakeholders.
Decriminalising drugs?
At least having a discussion on drugs. What I can say from my part is I think the time has probably arrived where we need to have a debate on this. I don't know what the rights and wrongs are. Marcellus is an experienced individual in this.
Very briefly, have you yourself ever taken Class A drugs?
I'm here today to talk about...
Have you yourself taken Class A drugs?
I'm very clear about this, Cathy.
Well, you just praised disinfectant and honesty.
And when journalists call politicians to talk about drugs, they usually run a mile. I didn't. I came here today to make very clear that Michael Gove has made pledges to 3.6 million EU nationals.
But you haven't answered my question,
and I will ensure that that message is loudly conveyed across the country.
I take your silence speaks volumes.
Not at all.
Alberto Costa, Marcellus Baz, thank you very much for joining me.